Thank you so much, first of all, to Celesta for having me here today. This is really exciting. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. To kick off today, we will be talking about the deep trends outlook for 2023 and beyond with John Hennessy. I'm going to give a few words about him, but first, let's introduce him. John. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone.
So, John asked me not to spend too much time on this, but we'll do a little bit. So he is the director of Knight Hennessy Scholars, the largest fully endowed graduate level scholarship program in the world. He's also the chairman of the board of Alphabet, aka Google for some of us who can't switch. He also serves on the board of directors for Cisco and the board of trustees for Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. He also used to be the president of Stanford University. As a Golden Bear myself.
She's a Cal graduate.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold it against him. It's all good.
Second best university in the Bay Area.
Depends on the year, you know, we have the axe right now. And he's also a pioneering computer scientist who's done many things, discovered many things, and contributed so much to computer science. I will not rattle that off because it's so long. And he also, you know, casually won the Turing Award in 2017 with Dave Patterson. So since we're talking about deep trends for the year, we're like 6 weeks in. The only thing anyone's talking about right now is ChatGPT. So let's start there. I'm assuming you've played with it. What do you think of ChatGPT? Are you impressed? Do you think it's dumb?
Well, I'm impressed with two things. One, first of all, the quality of the natural language abilities, both to interpret a query, but also to respond to something, so the generative function. And also, I'm impressed that it manages to, at least at a fairly superficial level, get a lot of things right. Maybe the third thing I'm impressed by is it's always confident that it has the right answer, even when it doesn't. And that's, of course, one of the flaws of these kinds of technologies. They can't tell whether or not they actually have the right answer. But I think it's a big step forward, and you know it builds on long history of investments in AI. You know, but AI is a fascinating field because if you go back to an earlier period, let's say more than 20 years back, what you'd see is this period of AI winters where we didn't fulfill the predictions. I remember my colleague John McCarthy at Stanford predicted all these things that we didn't get to any of them. Right? And the first time we broke through, when we broke through with chess, we broke through with brute force. The Deep Blue was a brute force overcoming the human ability to look so many levels ahead in chess. But AlphaGo was not. AlphaGo deeply understood something about how to play Go and recognized what were strong board positions. And that was really the turning point. Because the AlphaGo breakthrough came 10 to 20 years ahead of what people thought was going to be, because Go is so much harder than chess, so much harder than chess. So that was a real breakthrough, and then it's just been moving. I have never, in my entire time as a computer scientist, which is now getting to be many decades, I've never seen a technology move as fast as the deep neural network learning, machine learning technologies are moving now. Never. And that's remarkable because I remember the days of the internet, and the internet moved really fast, I thought. And the VLSI revolution happened really fast. But this AI revolution, as somebody pointed out, it's the only thing that's moving faster than Moore's law. And it's true, the number of papers is accelerating at a rate which is incredible.
Are you surprised that an app like ChatGPT has caught so much of the cultural zeitgeist right now?
I don't think, in the same way, we're not Go-centric the way large parts of Asia are. But I happened to be in South Korea when AlphaGo won the match against the world Go champion. that caught their attention in the same way that ChatGPT is catching our attention. I think it's awakened in everybody a sense that maybe the singularity is a lot closer, this turning point where computers really are more capable than humans is closer than we thought.
How do you square that with the fact that it does spit out a lot of incorrect information, even on really simple things where the data's on the internet and it could just,
Yeah. The one story I heard that was really remarkable is somebody asked it to write something related to scientific result, and it made up the references. And so that was, it knew what references should look like. It just didn't know to get ones that made sense for the paper. We'll get there. We'll get there. This is the beginning. These models are being trained at massive size. They're being trained on the entire internet. We're going to have to rethink how we train them. Maybe you don't want to give it a whole bunch of junky websites to train on. You want to think about training it on more useful data. Wikipedia, look at how good Wikipedia has become over time. I mean, it's even for complicated things in computer science, it's 98% accurate maybe. So that's remarkable that we can achieve that. And if we take the training and go the right direction, add some human screening on it, I think we'll get there. But it's going to take a few more years of development to really be something that we're proud of.
That's fair. So you're the chair of Alphabet, so I'm really curious how you think about this from that standpoint. OpenAI put it out, it got tons of attention, everyone's playing with it, it's in the headlines all day, and then Google kind of was like, oh wait, we have that tech too, let's put out our own product. Meta is apparently feeling a little bit left out because it's been putting out some products, taking them down. What is the place of these types of apps for big technology companies? Is this just a demo to prove that they have the AI capabilities?
Part of it is just a demo. It's to show that this capability exists. I don't think it's yet productized. But you can imagine a time when people, and not that far away, will people sit down in front of their computer and say, write me this report on this subject, or something that's really close. Summarize these 10 news stories for me and write a good summary. That we can do today. ChatGPT can do a pretty good job of that. Here's one that I really like. Here are a bunch of graphics and some data. Make me a beautiful PowerPoint presentation. Beautiful. Save some time. And I think this will happen. I think we'll see that. One of my colleagues in law school said, legal briefs are lots of searching through citations to get relevant cases. This technology could revolutionize how you do legal briefs and construct legal briefs. So I think it's early days yet. So we just have to continue to push, get the technology out there, and then make it practical. So right now, you really don't want to take a model with 300 billion parameters and have everybody trying to use it, even for inference. Forget about the training problem. The training problem is a gigantic compute problem. But even for inference, it means your inference cost is too high, right? So biggest problem with ChatGPT now is you try to get on, and what does it tell you? We're too busy now, right? Come back later. So I think we're going to have to tame the cost of these things, figure out how to get models which are more appropriate, maybe even more fine-tuned for a particular task. So rather than try to build one system that does everything, we build systems which are focused on particular things, pre-trained on that, which means we can probably use a lot smaller model, which will be much more practical for doing the work.
How far out do you think like a truly useful products that have that technology embedded, do you think we are?
A year, 2 years? I think in the business intelligence community, this is going to happen so fast because the ability to use, if you've got data, if you have a good set of data you can train from, and you're trying to optimize some complex business structure or relationship, I think there's probably nothing better than this for doing it. Another way to think about this, and you can see some of this in things like Copilot and these other kinds of apps, essentially what we're doing is talking about programming with data rather than programming with lots of lines of code that people have to write. And if you have to write that, suppose you're building a business intelligence system. You've got to code in all these particular things about that business, and the code is a mess. It takes a long time to produce. It can be buggy. Suppose, though, I have a whole bunch of business data. I do a supervised learning task on that, and I use that as my business intelligence system. I think that's probably within the next year or two, we'll see systems that do this really well.
I guess I'm curious, is this a real leap in technology? Because you mentioned Copilot, right, the GitHub tool, and I feel like for several years we've been hearing from startups and large companies talk about, oh yeah, we will help mine your data internally at your company so you can get all the best insights or whatever. So is there a real leap in technology now?
I think the leap is in the machine learning technology as the fundamental thing. I mean, if you think about lots of, my colleague Ed Feigenbaum, who won the Turing Award many years for his early work on knowledge-based systems, said there was a fundamental change. Early on in AI, we were trying to build systems that reasoned. Now we're building systems that recognize really complex structures and things and analyze it. And it's a different shift in how we think about things. The advantage of that, I mean, if you think about all the years we spent trying to build smarts into AI, well, let me point out that we all start with brains that are pretty empty, right? We don't know how to do a lot of things. How do we learn language? We absorb it. We learn it, right? So learning is the fundamental insight. That's what human brains are good at, and now we're building computers where learning is what they're good at. That's the fundamental breakthrough. Figuring out how to apply it to lots of different contexts is going to take time, but it'll happen.
Do you think Google's answer to ChatGPT will be better?
I think it's a question of getting the right thing out there. I think Google was hesitant to productize this because it didn't think it was really ready for a product yet. But I think as a demonstration vehicle, it's a great piece of technology.
Why wouldn't it not be ready?
Because you don't want to put a system out that either says wrong things or sometimes says toxic things, right? So there's a level of caution about this, and I think we in the tech industry have to be a little more careful about the situation we create in civil society. I think we didn't. I don't think any of us, I didn't, I don't think Vint anticipated that people would use the internet to do evil things. We thought, I'm from the age where if you spammed somebody, you were a social pariah. Now I get 10 spam messages for every real message, right? So the world has changed, I think, and we've got to think about what role technology has in ensuring that we have a functioning democracy, we have people who can live together and work together, we don't have hatred or some of these other toxic effects we've seen. I think we really do need to worry about that.
I'm going to get back to that topic in a second, but lastly on generative AI, the buzzword of the day. Besides chat apps and even DALL-E, which is basically the image version of that, what do you think will be the other sort of contributions from generative AI? What are we going to be using it for, seeing it in?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kia. I think a good way to think about this is, how do you use this as an amplifier of human ability? And I like that word amplifier because you're not really replacing it. So take DALL-E, right? I mean, okay, suppose I need some graphics done for something. I need a picture generated from some text.
Like your PowerPoint?
PowerPoint, in a PowerPoint thing. How do I get that, right? And I may not get exactly what I want, or same thing with the Stable Diffusion as a version of the video app. Same thing, I may not get a video that's perfect, or a PowerPoint presentation, or a paragraph that's perfect. But maybe I get something I can really work with and enhance and then use some human intelligence to make it even better. That's why I like the word amplifier. And if you think about education, we could do a lot to amplify the ability of teachers to really help all the kids in a classroom. If you're a teacher in a modern classroom, one of the problems you face is 25% of the class needs to move faster than the rest of the class. 25% is confused and lost, and there are a bunch of kids in the middle. How does a teacher possibly deal with that range of ability? But suppose they had an AI assistant that was coaching some of the students and telling the teacher, these students are having problems with this. You can imagine making that teacher more effective. Not eliminating the teacher, but making the teacher more effective.
Okay. Ed tech, anything else?
Oh, well, I think the world is going to change as this technology gets better and better. You know, some of us thought that point at which we'd have a artificial general intelligence was 40 or 50 years away. I think everybody's horizon has moved in by probably 10 or 20 years. And now we'll see what happens. I mean, it is amazing when you think about this. These models keep getting bigger, and every time we make a jump up in the size of the model, we seem to be able to do new tasks. So we don't know where that's going to plateau yet, and I think we're just still figuring it out.
So you brought up earlier thinking about sort of the impact on society. And one area that I'm so fascinated by is defense tech, especially since right now there's a big conversation around AI and defense tech, and is the US behind? Should we do more to be, on par with some other countries in the world? And Google famously or infamously had to grapple with some of these ethical implications with Project Maven and some other things. What are some takeaways you can share about grappling with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kia. I think the hard part of this problem is separating out defensive technology from offensive technology. I don't think any of us want to see Attack of the Killer Robots kind of thing occur here with offensive technology. On the other hand, there's lots of defensive technology that you'd like to be able to deploy. Like, I'd like to know if I'm in a potentially dangerous situation, whether that truck coming down the road just stopped at a place where I suspect weapons of mass destruction or dynamite was stored or something else. And therefore, I should be extremely careful about screening that truck and making sure it doesn't contain explosives, for example. That's a defensive use of technology, which I think we'd all believe is useful and helpful. Of course, the problem with that technology is it could be turned into offensive technology, because if you can use it to decide whether the thing coming down the road is dangerous or not, you could use it also to target the thing coming down the road. So we get into this very nuanced situation. Look, the United States is in a leadership position because of more than 50 years of research funded by the government on artificial intelligence. If we need that lead in national defense, we should make sure we still have it.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, we can't fall behind.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about deep tech, R&D, huge piece of that, right? We can't make breakthroughs without that part. Currently, we're seeing a lot of companies shed a lot of employees, tightening their belts. How do you think about the ability for big tech companies to continue to innovate and provide some of that new cutting edge technology if they're seemingly right now kind of deprioritizing the resources?
Yeah, I think two things. First of all, this is a challenging time for the industry. We were coming off of when the pandemic began to wane. The technology just took off and everybody was growing, and there was an incredible war for talent in the Valley. And I think nobody really saw the macroeconomic shift that was going to occur, and now we have to deal with that issue and pay the price of it. I think companies, this is a time when, Jim Morgan, who was the CEO of Applied Materials for many years, said something to me that I always remember. He said, great companies do really well in downturns because they make tough decisions. And then when the upturn comes, they're in a better position. And I think one of the things that happens is when things are going gangbusters, you start whole new sets of projects, sometimes without thinking which things are really aligned with your market. You get too many products. You get too much spreading out. And I'm reminded that when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, the first thing he did wasn't invent new technology. That actually took a little while. He actually cut the number of products that Apple was shipping in half, because he said we have too many products, and as a result, we have too many things which are B-level or C-level things as opposed to A-level things. And I think that's what we'll see happen. People will decide companies will decide where they really want to invest, what's really important core technology, and I think they'll continue to make the investments in that technology and maybe shed some things that they were not really committed to and in a leadership position on.
Do you think that's creating sort of a great environment right now for startups?
Great for startups. It was really hard in startups to hire people given all the competition with the existing big players. And I think startups have such an important role to play in the Valley. I mean, one of the great things about the Valley is you cannot rest on your laurels, because some new startup will come along and will really give you a run for your money. And I think that really keeps companies at the cutting edge.
Are there any startups right now that you think are doing some cutting edge stuff that you're impressed with?
There are so many startups that are doing.
Pick a couple of your children.
I don't want to pick any children. That's not fair to anybody else. So,
are there areas that you think are really being pushed forward by startups right now?
Well, I think certainly the whole AI area broadly. Crypto, once we figure out what's it really good for, what do we want to do with it, and what role does it play? Clearly, there are some really significant roles that crypto can play, I think, but we've seen the dangers of having perhaps too little regulation in some cases. So we've got to figure that out. I think there's amazing technology here in blockchain, smart contracts, things like this, that could automate in a secure way a lot of functions which we now do by hand. So I think that'll work. I think there are a couple interesting companies who are exploring alternative ways to push Moore's Law further than we thought we could push it, which we better figure this out, because if we don't figure this out, everybody's gonna have to get a lot more serious about writing efficient software, because they're not going to be able to rely on the hardware to continue to deliver improvements every year the way it has in the past.
What about climate tech?
Oh, yeah. So climate, if I could wave my magic wand, the piece of technology I'd invent would be low-cost, bulk, long-term storage. If I could invent that technology, I could bring the renewable future so much closer. It's just a really hard problem, and nobody's really come up with a good solution. I'm excited by some of the work going on in new methods for doing fusion as well as for doing modular fission reactors. If we could build the modular fission reactor, get it certified once, and then as you need more power, you just bolt multiple them together, that would be transformative, as would the fusion, if we can make the breakthrough on fusion. Now, I'm cautiously optimistic about fusion. We're putting more money into it than we ever have before. On the other hand, the quote about fusion, it's the technology of tomorrow and always will be. So that's what but maybe, and clearly it's such an incredible technology. If you can make a breakthrough on it, it would make a big difference. I think we'll continue to see progress on batteries. There are a couple of interesting companies who are trying to find new battery structures that have greater longevity, don't rely on some difficult materials, cobalt or nickel, for example. Those would accelerate the ability to electrify large parts of the economy, make electric cars really cheaper. If somebody can figure out how to fly, that would be great, but maybe we'll just have to figure out how to take some CO2 out of the atmosphere as well.
That was actually a question I was going to ask you about. What level of investment do you think we should be putting into carbon capture and removal?
Yeah, so carbon capture from the free atmosphere is a very tough problem, because the amount of carbon dioxide in the free atmosphere is lower, so that's a really hard problem. An alternative is you stick your carbon capture on the back end of a power plant, right? So you're burning and then you're capturing. At least you've got higher levels of CO2 coming out. You still have the problem that what's coming out of that smokestack is still mostly nitrogen. So you've still got to figure out how to separate the CO2 efficiently. And then you've got to compress it and make sure that it's stored permanently. And that permanently is, you can't store it in something where it leaks out over time. So I think we're going to have to use some part of carbon capture as part of the solution. So figuring out what could really work in what time frame and what pieces of technology are we missing to make it practical. We got to get down by about an order of magnitude in price. That's the problem.
But do you think that some folks are looking at it as like a cop-out from lowering our emissions?
Yeah, I worry about that. I do worry about that. I think, look, start with the easiest thing to do is energy efficiency, right? And there's about a 10 to 15% savings in CO2 just in energy efficiency alone. And then thinking about electrifying whatever you can, right? I mean, we have this problem. Look at the problem we have in California. How many people in the audience have an electric vehicle? How many people plug it in at night? Right? Because you're home, you plug it in at night. Guess where the power comes from at night? It comes from sun on the other side of the world, but they don't ship it over to us. So we have this problem that we need to figure out that solution. We need to go to something 24/7. If I could store solar power during the day and then get it at night, that would solve my problem. But batteries are too expensive to do it bulk.
See what you did there. You're just bringing it back to your favorite technology. All right, fair enough. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about chips. I know there's going to be a wonderful panel entirely about that later, but we can talk about it now. What is next for chips? I mean, the U.S. is trying to make a comeback.
Yeah, so there's kind of two separate problems. One is the whole chip manufacturing supply chain problem, right? Which we should all, it just makes everybody very nervous to have, let's say, 70% of the high-end, cutting-edge semiconductor capacity on the other side of the world, much closer to countries which maybe don't like us than next to the U.S. So that's a big problem. We've got to figure out how to do that. Some of the issues we have to worry about. It takes too long to build a manufacturing plant in the U.S., too many regulations. If you go over to any of these plants, whether it be at TSMC or you go to Foxconn where they put iPhones together, what you find out is that engineers are on the shift 24 hours a day. So there are people working, engineering people working. We're not used to that, but if you want to run a plant that costs billions and billions of dollars, you've got to have people there 24 hours a day, and you've got to have people who can really deal with quality issues and problems in the line. So we've got to fix the manufacturing problem, and then we've got to figure out how can we extend the roadmap for semiconductors as long as possible, because I don't think we yet have an alternative technology in hand to replace semiconductors. So, and figuring out how to make things cheap enough, because the number of chips in the world is going to proliferate. And that's partly driven by the energy efficiency issues. And people have talked so much about Moore's Law ending and all that. Moore's Law is slowing down, there's no doubt. Well, first of all, Moore's Law wasn't a law, right? It was somebody's prediction of what could happen. But the failure of Dennard scaling, which has meant that energy efficiency is a much harder problem for next generation chips. You already see that. I mean, who would have guessed 20 years ago that you'd go buy an Intel processor, and when the thing got too hot, it would shut itself down, it would turn off some cores and do things and slow down the clock rate. But that's what happens today. So we've got to adjust to that problem. The way to adjust to that problem is to build chips which are much more specific to the function being performed and achieve dramatically better efficiency because of that. And we've seen this with chips from NVIDIA or Google's TFP for doing tensor and other kinds of machine learning problems. So we'll see. I think we're going to see more of that. And if you look at an Apple M1, there you see it. I mean, we've moved into a heterogeneous function, right? There are little processors on there for doing lots of things, right? So I think we're going to have to move to a different kind of model We're going to have to improve design cost, because if you've got not one chip owning a large fraction of the market, but 10 or 20 or 30 different chips. But that opens up opportunities for designers to do new things as well and to innovate in new ways.
So is that where you think the U.S. can be a leading force again? Because as you mentioned, with the factories, we're not used to that stuff. I mean, we haven't been doing it for a while.
Yep.
Probably not where we're going to win.
Yeah, I don't think we need to win necessarily. We've got to be competitive in the factory arena. And then we've got to figure out how to drive core semiconductor technology forward, right? And then the place we've always been strong is kind of on the design side and innovation on design. I remember, many years ago, I'm a product of when the big chip wars were between Japan and the U.S., right? And we were worried we were going to lose it, and the DRAM was moving outside the U.S., and then we kind of figured out that DRAMs were not really the things you really wanted to be building. They were a commodity technology, and we moved to processors and other things as the key technology. And I think the same thing can happen here.
Fair enough. Medicine. Is that an area where you're seeing exciting stuff? Is there something in the near future that's more than just business model innovation that we can see from the tech world?
I think we'll see, obviously, CRISPR-Cas9 was really a turning point in terms of a technology that could actually modify the genome and make changes. And that's a potentially disruptive technology for some particular classes of problems. This whole movement towards precision medicine, where we understand in a much deeper way of what's causing a problem for an individual. Look at the RNA vaccine breakthrough. This is absolutely amazing. You look at the average time to develop a new vaccine, it's about 7 years of development time plus testing time. And when we developed and launched a vaccine in less than a year. So there's tremendous progress there. It's obviously extremely complicated. One of my colleagues once told me, most of the breakthroughs that occur at the lab bench never even get to their first clinical trial, let alone actually out to patients eventually. And that's just because humans are really we're really complicated things. There was no intelligent designer. There was evolution, and evolution designed things in a really unusual way. So we've got to figure out, and you've got to go through a testing and see if this really works. Does it really occur? I've got some of my colleagues at Stanford they believe we will build artificial organs. But as they say in the next breath, and I'm in a 20 to 30 year research horizon to figure out how to do that. So yes, we'll get there, but it's going to take a long time.
Do you think we'll have more issues around public trust of medicine or treatments developed that way? Because as we saw with the COVID RNA vaccines, a lot of folks were kind of freaked out and had concerns about where did this come from? It was developed so fast that cannot be safe.
Yeah. Well, and because it was experimental, which it had to be, people thought experimental meant they were experimenting on me. And that's a problem. I think we're going to have that. I think we'll also have problems with issues of privacy and concerns over privacy in medical records. And we've got to do a better job. I mean, one of the issues that the Moore Foundation has been focusing on is diagnostic errors. If you count in diagnostic errors delayed time to get to the accurate diagnosis, which has at least some negative patient impact, roughly half the cases, the non-trivial cases in the U.S. have some diagnostic error involved in them, where they run the wrong test, they get the wrong diagnosis, or they don't get to. Boy, so why is that? Because it's really complicated to figure out what's wrong with somebody from some symptoms. It's really complicated now with a whole barrage of tests that are available to a physician to figure out what's the next one you should run that cuts the search space appropriately. Well, we know how to do this with technology. So again, can we bring technology to bear on this problem? One result I was really interested was a joint paper that was done by some guys at Google together with some people at Stanford Medicine to look at skin lesions and decide whether or not a skin lesion was cancerous or not. So how do you teach a computer to do this? The same way you teach a dermatologist to do it. They look at lots of images. And the dermatologist studies those images and learns how to tell the difference. And the computer studies the images. What's the difference? That computer can look at 10,000 images easily. It doesn't care. The dermatologist is going to look at hundreds of thousands maybe to try to learn that. So we can perhaps compete with humans in a lot of these interesting problems.
Do you think people will be less willing to accept the occasional error if it's from a computer?
That's a good question. Look at self-driving cars.
Exactly.
We have exactly this problem. I think we're probably at the point where we can get self-driving that's as good as humans and probably better than teenage kids, people who've had a couple drinks, and all of us who are over the tender age where eyesight begins to get less good. So we can outdrive many people on the road, but somehow we want it to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. I saw one case of an autonomous vehicle where somebody ran a red light and hit the autonomous vehicle. Now, could you or I have stopped in that case or seen that guy coming at the red light wasn't going to stop? Who knows? But these are hard problems that I don't think we'll ever be perfect at.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's such a strange tension with the self-driving cars, and what level of safety and perfection are we willing to accept on public roads?
Yeah.
Are you excited about self-driving cars? Do you want to have one?
Yeah. I like to turn on my self-driving function sometimes too. Especially on the highway, it works pretty well. I think crowded urban environments are the hard thing, and you get into these very difficult problems, and I've seen some of them that are really hard, right? Car driving along, pedestrian walks from between two parked cars in front of that car. First of all, that pedestrian shouldn't have done that, but the car is going to be held responsible for it. So we've got to figure out how to deal with these complex urban environments and unpredictable behavior, shall we say, by other drivers. If all cars were self-driving and they communicated with one another, we could make this work, but we're not. That's a very hard place to get to.
When do you think we'll have self-driving cars widely available?
Yeah, so it's funny that many years ago, when I was on the Microsoft Research Advisory Board, we had a bet about a whole bunch of things, and one of them was self-driving cars. And the bet was within 20 years we would have self-driving cars that were no more expensive than, let's say, a Cadillac. Okay. And we didn't get there. We didn't have the integrated technology that really made it, and we didn't use enough machine learning. One of the important roles that machine learning plays in self-driving cars is it deals with uncertain situations. Should the car slow down because it's not clear what it's looking at? And I think if we can make that technology just a little more resilient, and then the question becomes, how much are you willing to pay? $20,000? Okay, well, $20,000 probably you have a good shot at it. I think it's going to be hard to get to a few $1,000s for that function.
Do you think we'll own them, or do you think we'll just?
That's a good question. You could imagine replacing all the Uber fleets with self-driving vehicles, right? It would certainly be more efficient in terms of driver time and things. And then we don't necessarily have to own it.
Fair enough. We won't have parking anyways, so.
Yeah, we shouldn't. Parking is a waste of space.
You heard it here. Last topic, Washington, or I guess government in general, but we'll go with Washington. I know you spent some time there over the years talking to folks. What are your takeaways? What do you think they're not understanding about technology?
I think technology, the government's, what's the important thing that the government does? It sets up some rules of the road so that people know how to compete and things like that. And it is the long-term funder of research. And if you look at breakthrough after breakthrough that's occurred, artificial intelligence, the VLSI revolution, the internet, all these things came out of government funding. And so keeping government focused on that and keeping them thinking about a long-term commitment to it, of really funding work that could transform our future. That's the role that government really has to have. And we need to, well, certainly we've had that in early times. I think we're getting back to it now. And we should continue that for sure.
Are there areas where you think maybe folks in DC are well-intentioned but sort of misunderstanding how to direct their problem solving?
Or things they aren't paying enough attention to. See, I think, I do worry about the negative effects of social media, but I really worry about cybercrime and cybersecurity issues. And I don't think we're paying nearly enough attention to those issues. And in the old days, it was that random hacker sitting out there doing something. Now it's a much more determined adversary, and we have to invest a lot more in the technology to make ourselves secure.
All right, Washington, cybersecurity. We only have a few seconds left. So what would you say is the deep tech trend that you're most excited about for this year?
I just think the AI revolution is upon us. It's stunning. Every year, we get a result which people did not predict. And that's amazing when that happens, and I think this is going to continue. And we're going to figure out how to make these models much more resilient over time, so they'll really transform the future.
Do you think ChatGPT would have predicted that better?
I don't know. I asked ChatGPT about whether it should be regulated. And it said, well, there are a lot of people who think I should be.
It's being honest, at least. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you, everyone, for
Thanks, everyone.
being here.